Coming up on this episode of Nintendo Cartridge Society, we press a bunch of A buttons. It's dangerous to go alone, so the Nintendo Cartridge Society goes with you. Welcome to Nintendo Cartridge Society. My name is Patrick Ellers, and I am joined, as I am always joined, by my co-host, Mark Mitchell. Mark, how's it going?
It's going great. Patrick, occasionally we record in a scenario where only one of us can hear the theme music, or neither of us can hear our show theme
We're
song.
having some monitor issues lately where I can't get both headphone jacks to work. So this is the scenario we're in right now where only I can hear the music.
And it's just really funny because normally when we're recording together and we're both listening to the music, it doesn't feel that long. But when one person can hear the
I know,
music
it's interminable.
and the other
Yeah.
person cannot, I'm like, what? Wow, her theme music is kind of long.
It's not even that long, though. It feels appropriate when you can hear it, but when you can't hear it, then yeah, it becomes some bizarre exercise in sitting in silence. This is something that we pay homage to every week on 433.
That is right.
So, I think it's okay that we subject each other to uncomfortable silences from time to time.
I think so too, and
Just so long as the audience doesn't hear those uncomfortable silences.
That's right. Very important.
I will cut those right out. And I don't cut anything out of the show, Mark. Speaking of things that should maybe be cut but aren't, the Sonic Forces borrowing program. Would you like to borrow my copy of Sonic Forces for the Nintendo Switch? You can. You really can. All you gotta do is email us at nintendocartridgesociety@gmail.com and give us a mailing address, a physical address, a place, a location on the earth where I can send my copy of Sonic Forces. You play it for as long as you want. You send it back. I pay for postage both ways. Is there a possibility that there's a copy of Untitled Goose Game in there? You bet there is. Does that make the program any less perfect or your time with it any less enjoyable? I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think that's possible.
I think it's the perfect borrowing program. So get on that list and enjoy or don't enjoy. It's not really up to the program's not about enjoying either of these games, right?
And how important, since it is the Sonic Forces borrowing program.
That's right. All right, Mark, let's get into our topic. Let's rank the Nintendo console controllers. Now, of course, first thing we have to do, we're not there. There are a whole host of controllers, right? That have been the method by which you control characters in Nintendo games. But what we want to do is we want to just have one controller representative of each generation, right? So
Right.
we're not doing some mega master list that includes both the Switch Pro controller and the Super Scope 6. That's not what's happening here,
Mhm.
unless those end up representing the Switch and the Super NES, and I would be shocked if the Super Scope ends up representing the Super NES.
Did you have a Super Scope or know anyone who had a Super
I
Scope?
knew someone who had a Super Scope. but
Okay, yeah, I
that's
never
it.
did. And I feel like
I don't even think
Zappers-
I played it.
No, Zapper, the NES Zapper,
Yeah.
lousy. You could not walk
Oh.
into a home.
Yeah,
Oh,
sorry.
sorry.
I thought you were smack talking to Zapper.
No, you're
this
right.
early
It's
in the
a good-
conversation. It's
No,
a classic.
No.
Yeah.
But yeah,
It was everywhere.
It was everywhere.
Ubiquitous.
But the Super Scope,
Am I using that right?
I believe it.
Okay.
And then the Super Scope, I never ever saw one.
Why? What? I guess maybe we can talk about it when we get to
Okay,
get to
fair
the
enough,
Super
fair
NES,
enough.
right? And again, we are just doing the home consoles, so how does the Game Boy function as a controller? We're not talking about that here, unless someone wants to bring up that maybe the GBA is their preferred controller for the GameCube.
Oh.
Or the 3DS, their preferred controller for the Wii U.
Yeah,
Because you could play Smash using a 3DS.
That's
I'm jumping the
true.
gun here. I'm going I'm going too far too fast. Let's start with the NES.
Yes.
Start with the earliest. And I think this one is probably obvious, but I think we should consider all of the all the various like forms of NES controller. So obviously there is the like pointy rectangle, black and gray.
The
NES
Widowmaker.
Yes, that's right. Because all of the little calluses on your hands were once married, but now they are dead.
Yeah, well, it's just they never really did this again, but true that the angle, like the corners on the controller are a little bit rounded, but it compared to, the more like bulbous shapes that we would get later, this one is definitely the most dangerous, I would say.
And yes, and like truly of any, I'm trying to think if there's like any other manufacturer that has such square controllers.
Yeah.
And like when they re-released the top loading NES, they remade the controllers and they were these like sort of dog bone shape, sort of in line with the Super NES controllers, except like the circle of them went like both like on the top and the bottom. But so while I feel like that's actually a superior controller, I don't think it is truly representative of what the NES is.
I think so too. I think that the standard like Nintendo Entertainment System controller that's shipped with the system is, first of all, like insanely iconic, and then also it's a little bit crazy how much this controller set the standard for what is to come. Like the D-pad, kind of the responsiveness of the buttons, having like a select and start. Like these are a lot of things that Nintendo has carried through for a long time.
Yeah, and select and start are such weird buttons, because they're like buttons that you're not meant to like accidentally push. Like you have to really go out of your way to like reach into the middle of the controller and push them.
And they're like
yeah, they feel different.
Yeah, they're like the mushy.
They're soft.
Yeah, like I'm trying to think of like another thing. Like it's not even really like a calculator.
Yeah, how to describe those buttons. And it's not it's the texture is replicated on the Super NES controller, but then never again.
Right. Well, any other controllers, that are remind you of the era that you used a lot?
Well, so we mentioned the Zapper already. The Zapper is a classic. Just the one button on it is that trigger. But also it's like light sensor. Pretty cool. Yeah, I like the Zapper. It is iconic. Obviously, we've got the Power Pad. Got to consider the Power Pad.
Right. And the Power Pad, I probably used more than the Zapper, but not for playing games. Just for using it for other things like building a fort.
Oh, sure.
And wrapping it around myself like a cloak.
Let me tell you, none of these other controllers can you wrap around you like a cloak.
Yeah, that's true.
So I guess there are only two other notable NES controllers that I want to bring up. One is the NES Advantage, which was like the joystick, which also had like little like rapid fire sliders on it. And this was like this is not a third party controller. Nintendo put this thing out.
So I never had one of those, but did it allow
But you saw it in Ghostbusters 2.
I did see it in Ghostbusters 2 and in real life. But could you like programmable's not the right word, but could you use it to like go turbo?
Yeah, that's those like rapid fire like slider things where you could you could set it to rapid fire, and I think it had like two different speeds of rapid fire, so that you could then just like hold down the button and it would consider it multiple repetitive inputs.
Oh, got it. Yeah, I did not understand how that worked.
So NES Advantage, that's one, but I didn't have one of these things.
No.
I had a weird, I don't remember who made it, but it was a wireless version of that. But like this is back when there was like the RF technology for Wi-Fi, where you had to like physically line up the receiver and the controller so that there was like nothing blocking them. It was like using a remote control on an old TV. Not fun, not reliable. And then the last controller, Mark, I think you know what I got to bring up here.
The Power Glove?
The Power Glove! It's so bad. But, not a useful peripheral. And in fact, like, does it even really count as a controller?
Sure. I don't know. Why would it not?
Well, just because it is so wacky and so, like, I guess we'll talk about it when we get to the Wii, but are we going to count the balance board as a controller?
Yeah,
Are we gonna count the Ring Con as a controller when
I
we get to the
I
Switch?
think you could make an
All right,
argument.
all right, all right. All
Because
right.
you're using it to manipulate, like characters or items
That's
or
true.
objects in
That
the
is
game.
true.
So
That is true.
yeah, I mean, so is Rob no? Because you
No,
are
'cause
using a
Rob-
controller.
Oh boy,
To
Rob
position
controls
Rob.
a controller. No,
Uh-huh.
you don't use a controller to position Rob. Rob is like he puts spinning tops on an NES controller, so like he pushes the A and B buttons.
Oh,
Do you know this about Rob? That
well,
like
so
this,
because there's like a little stand
yeah,
with that he's like placing like cylinders or some like discs down on, and that is
He puts those-
inputting a button.
yeah, that's right, that's right.
And so like this little like stand thing is what's plugged in. Or are you positioning an NES controller like into the stand?
Okay, here's the thing. I've never played with a Rob.
I haven't either.
But my understanding is that he has a second controller in front of him, like an NES controller, and when he puts the spinning tops and columns and stuff down, that is him pressing buttons on that other controller.
Okay. I mean, I totally, absolutely, 100% believe you.
I believe he controls the controller. So if there's some sort of like meta controller, then that's what Rob is.
Yeah, no, that could completely.
Mark is doing some quick
I'm
research right now, trying to
I'm
figure it out.
Googling, like crazy.
I'm not.
Okay, so
I'm not even trying.
so this is we figured it out. Rob sits on top of this like pedestal
Yeah.
that has bases, and then
he picks up those spinning tops.
he picks up the spinning tops and puts them down on blue or red.
Right.
And then at the end of his like contraption, you place a player 2 controller in it.
That's right.
And so when he puts like a spinning top on top of the blue one, it pushes like the B button.
Right.
And when he puts it on the A button or on the red position, then it pushes the A button.
Which why was he even a thing? Like why wasn't he? Why isn't that just like the AI in the game making those button pushing decisions? Or why don't you have your friend pushing those things for you?
Well, because wasn't the point of it to make it like, oh, the NES is a toy, it's not a video game machine.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. So I mean, Rob is in many ways like part of what makes the NES successful is because like he allows them to appear in toy stores.
It's right. Yeah, which is so weird because I never knew anybody
Yeah.
who had a Rob.
Not a soul.
Or like I never saw one in real life. So they must have like ditched it pretty early. They were just
Yeah.
like, oh, this thing can sell on its own. Toy stores aren't scared anymore of stocking the NES. So.
Right. Well, and I also wonder if like the pivot to the model with Duck Hunt is like another thing that like justifies it as a toy pretty quick.
Mhm.
That like it comes with this gun. Okay, but so regardless, we think it's the rectangular
Yeah,
NES
just like kind of like
controller.
the standard controller.
And just to let's just float this here. I don't think it matters for this conversation because we were talking about the NES here, not the Famicom. But how do you square this with the Famicom controller?
My only exposure to like a Famicom controller is theoretical. I don't think I've ever
Yeah,
like held one in my hand.
Yeah, me too. I've never held one in my hand. I know that it is less pointy, and I know that the second player controller has a microphone in it,
Mm-hmm.
and that they're hardwired into the system. You can't disconnect them,
Yeah.
which is wild. But yeah, we're not counting the Famicom controller. Mark, shall we move on to the Super NES?
Yes.
And of course, this means that we will not be counting the Super Famicom controller, even though its button colors are far superior to the purple and different purple colors of the Super NES controller.
Which I find to be such interesting, like such an interesting color choice, because I think of the Super Nintendo era as Nintendo really leaning into this like you're playing with power and it's
Yeah.
like really edgy and everything, and so
Well, this
kind
is
of,
when
like,
it's competing with the Genesis too.
yeah, so this kind of like lavender color choice for
it is bizarre.
for X and Y is just interesting.
It is like you say, like lavender and like the sort of like darker purple for the A and B buttons. But that being like the alternative to and I'm not going to remember what all the colors are of the other buttons, but like yellow, blue, green, and red.
Uh-huh.
For the Super Famicom, like that they went from rainbow to just like soft purples is very interesting to me.
Yeah.
But okay, otherwise the Super NES controller, I gotta say, this is a favorite of mine.
It's a very good controller. It has, like Patrick was saying when he was talking about the NES controller redesign, kind of like a half dog bone shape type thing going on.
Yeah,
I don't know how you would describe it.
and the circular parts at the end of the dog bone just extend below the main body. That doesn't extend like above the main body. And it's sort of like a precursor to what we would get in the form of like grips on other controllers. It falls way short of that. That like it's still sort of a hand crampy experience to hold on to this thing, especially if you start like having to use the L and R buttons with any regularity.
One of the things that what I'm holding in my hands right now is
We're holding all these controllers in our hands.
is a Super Nintendo controller that came with the Classic Edition, so the SNES Classic Edition. And it had been such a long time since I had held like a new Super Nintendo controller when this thing came out that I had forgotten, like, the ones that I had as a kid and, are still at my parents' house have been worn through time. And so the actual like texture of everything is so different on a new one than, like the ones I had as a kid.
Yeah, totally. I mean, even just like the texture, like you can feel it in the button presses, but also just like the texture of the thing itself.
Also, looking at it from an angle, I've never really noticed how it's tapered before.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
a MacBook Air almost.
Yeah,
I
a
mean,
little
not to
bit.
that extreme. It doesn't go to like a point, but there's a little bit of tapering, and also the B and A buttons are concave. Or Vex?
Convex, because concave is like scooped out.
Okay, and then so X and Y are concave.
Right,
Which is
so-
a cool kind of like way to just be able to tell
Yeah.
where your finger is.
by touch. And the concaveness is borrowed from the NES controller, which is like that. So I guess that's the first time that the American NES controller, or American Nintendo controller, is using convex button shape for the A and B. The start and select return on this one, except now they are slanted, and the D-pad I would say is a little bit bigger, but generally feels just as good. Something we didn't mention on the NES is that D-pad feels great.
Oh yeah, and that it had a D-pad at all.
Yeah, that was revolutionary, and now all these controllers have D-pads except the Joy-Con.
I guess the other part of the Super Nintendo controller is that it has these shoulder buttons for the first time, the R and L. So you're a lot more input possibilities on the Super Nintendo controller versus the NES controller.
Yeah, double the number of buttons. But are there any other controllers we want to consider as part of the Super NES? I guess the Super Scope 6 is the only other one that I can even think of.
Yeah, so unlike the NES, where we got as part of a bundle the Zapper and the Power Pad, like I personally did not have anything but the standard Super Nintendo controllers.
I have one more to put forth. It's the Super NES mouse.
Of course, yes.
For use with Mario Paint, and of course the Super Nintendo Jurassic Park. You could use it in that. Not actually a great mouse. Actually, a pretty bad. I mean, this is from the era where all mouses were using the rollerball technology. So like you frequently had to like pop that thing open and like knock the dust out of there so it could actually read your motions. And then it's just a simple like 2-button mouse. And the it was like 2 separate buttons on the mouse. They didn't like take up the whole front of the thing. You had to like. But it was like the neat same like color scheme as the Super NES controller, the light gray with like the big purple buttons, which is kind of cool.
So I think
were those buttons labeled as A and B?
I never. So we got Mario Paint as like from like a garage sale or like a cousin or something, but I never knew that it had a mouse accessory until we were doing this show and you told me. So
wait, could you do anything with it without a mouse?
You could use the Super Nintendo controller and use like the D-pad and stuff, but it definitely was not like I never enjoyed Mario Paint because I never understood it.
No, it sounds impossible.
It was like way too difficult. to do anything in it.
So I'm looking at it now, and they're not labeled as A and B. They're just like 2 buttons on a mouse.
Huh.
Why wouldn't you call them A and B? All the rest of your controllers have A and B buttons. All right, so obviously we're going with the standard Super NES controller, right?
Yep.
Mark, moving on to the Nintendo 64. What a controller.
Yeah, here this is a weird one.
Yeah, I'm gonna hold it for a second.
So it's like a trident.
Yes.
Like it has 3 prongs and like
so many buttons.
so many buttons.
And multiple different grips, right? I mean, like you say, each prong of the trident is a different place from which you can grip it. So theoretically, you could hold it on like the outermost parts of the trident. You could hold it in the middle and the right part of the trident, or a like middle and left part of the trident. 3 different ways to hold this thing. And no matter where you are, you've got a back button, right? The L, the R, and the Z under the thumbstick. And there's a thumbstick.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about this thumbstick?
So until recently, it had been a very, very, very long time that I had played with like a new Nintendo 64 controller, because all of the ones, again, that like, you know, I have at my parents' house, or the thumbstick has just been completely destroyed.
Oh yeah, just absolutely demolished by any time playing Mario Party.
Exactly. And so, you know, like revolutionary for the time, absolutely wild, thinking about, you know, controlling a first-person shooter like GoldenEye,
right?
You know, with this sort of controller.
What's so funny though is that like when I play a Nintendo 64 game now, I need this controller. And maybe that's because like I just have the experience of using it already, or because it is so bizarre that every experience needed to be tailored to this controller specifically. But like I can't play a Nintendo 64 game in handheld mode on the Switch. It doesn't my brain refuses to calculate it.
I remember buying Sin and Punishment on the Wii Virtual Console and
Yes.
trying to play it with a Wii Pro controller,
which we will get to,
and finding it very difficult. Like,
Yeah.
I wish at that point that I would have been able to play it with a Nintendo 64 controller.
Because the Nintendo 64 controller has a sort of second D-pad that is actually 4 buttons. And it can never decide whether it wants them to be buttons or another D-pad. It's just there's just nothing like this controller. You know?
It feels like one of those things where, you know, because like in Mario 64, the game that seemingly a lot of, you know, hardware choices were made for the Nintendo 64, you use the C buttons to kind of change the angle of the camera.
Yeah.
So I've always assumed that C stood for camera at some point. But, you know, you use it
just
for like
A, B, C. Like it's also it's
sure,
not a long walk.
I've actually never thought about that.
You've never thought about that?
I've never considered
the alphabet.
But you also, you know, you use it for inventory in different games.
Yep.
Like it had like so many different uses. I also this is the first time, like you brought up Z that's on the back of that main trigger there, but like Z targeting was huge.
After it was invented, yeah.
After it was invented, and you know, we still use that idea of like Z targeting today. No select button on the Nintendo 64 controller.
Yeah.
Just a big red start button.
And we've done away with the idea of the like mushy, like kind of rubbery buttons. It is now just like a big red button. Also different colors for the A and B buttons. I guess this is the return of the Super Famicom button colors, right?
Right.
Just like sort of reshuffled here on the Nintendo 64 controller. And this is where we have like a vestigial D-pad, right? Doesn't it feel like this poor D-pad doesn't get much play, is not prioritized?
It does not get much play, but
it's a good D-pad.
It's a good D-pad.
We're both pushing it.
We're both pushing it, and then like when I compare it to the Super NES one and the NES one, like I think the Nintendo 64
the best D-pad
controller has the
so
best
far.
D-pad
so
far. Yeah.
And looking out ahead, I think maybe just the best D-pad. I think it's possible that's the best D-pad.
It's very good. Also interesting, you know, we will get to it with the GameCube, but they kind of carry over these like button colors, like the C buttons on the NES or this Nintendo 64 controller are yellow.
Right.
And then kind of like this second analog stick that again is used a lot of times for controlling the camera in GameCube
And
games.
it is the C stick.
Yeah, is like
Also
yellow.
yellow.
So when you see them all together, it's kind of neat to see the way that they like echo each other.
All right. So, any other controllers for the Nintendo 64?
To be honest, not that I'm aware of.
Not that I can think of. There are all the like plugins to the controller. You know, either the like Hey You Pikachu microphone or the Rumble Pack or anything like that. But those are all add-ons to the controller, not the controller itself.
Yeah, you want to save your game, you're gonna do it on the back of the NES N64 controller.
Yeah, sometimes. Usually, you just saved it right on the cartridge because it's a cartridge. Why would you not do that? All right, so that's a gimme. That's really the only one. Next, let's move to the GameCube. GameCube controller, a wild little controller.
Yeah, completely wild controller, especially, you know, at a time when the other systems were all in on dual analog.
Yep.
Um,
We sort of do have two analog sticks here, but they are crazy. they're offset, right? So on the left side it's in the normal sort of like outside position, and on the right side it's on the inside position. But it's also like it's just a nub. It doesn't really have a stick so much as just like a little mound that you manipulate.
yeah, for what purpose they did that,
I don't know.
I don't really know.
I think because they still didn't want to just like do the dual analog thing. Like I think they knew that there is use in having a second analog input, but didn't want that to be like the way and the reason you interacted with it.
Mm-hmm. It also has this like itty bitty little D-pad.
The D-pad's too small.
That maybe is even like
Even more vestigial.
Yeah, than on the N64 controller.
And it's just worse, right?
Uh-huh.
I think it's just a worse D-pad. The button layout, cool. I love this button layout. I love the big green A button, the smaller B button that is blue. I was saying blue. It's red. So like you've got A for A is go, B is stop, and that's color coded, and it's color coded in every version of them, no matter what color the controller itself is. And then these little like bean shaped, kidney bean shaped X and Y buttons.
And I feel like it's such a smart. I know that the GameCube controller now is, and maybe because of how long it's lasted, because of Smash Brothers,
Totally.
and how many Smash Brother games
I
supported
think
it.
that's it.
But like at the time, it was widely derided.
Yes, that's right.
The big A button was laughable. The little pills. It has like a purple Z button on the
Right.
side.
But the analog triggers are neat and something that Nintendo doesn't repeat ever.
Yeah, it has these huge, beautiful triggers on the back that
are so squishy.
They're
to
so
push 'em.
squishy and are analog, meaning that like you can push them in the majority of the way, and that's one click. Like that counts as one action. But then there's an additional click at the very end
Mhm.
that counts as like a second one. So for like in games,
like Sunshine.
yeah, like Mario Sunshine, you can use Flood to do one action when you're starting to press it in, and then it triggers the second action when you push it all the way in. It's very cool.
Yeah. So it's a neat controller, and it's the default controller, which makes me think, just like the rest of the default controllers, it is automatically going to be the one that we consider like the controller for it. However, enter the Wavebird, the wireless GameCube controller, which does a couple things slightly differently. One is that it like fills in the space. There's like this weird gap in the middle of a GameCube controller, and
it's like décolletage.
Yeah, I don't know what's happening there. Like it makes the whole thing look and feel more like fragile than it really is. But then I guess I mean, and then of course the Wavebird is wireless, and unlike the technology that I was describing before, where you have to like line everything up, it has this super easy to use like dial system. These are game changers, right? And especially when you're playing multiplayer games like Smash or like Mario Party or Mario Kart, that you could just like pass controllers around. It was really the first time that like wireless controllers were like standard and available, and people just had them.
Well, especially for whatever reason with like the Nintendo 64 and the GameCube specifically, maybe because it started having 4 controller
That's
ports,
right.
I had so many like third-party controllers for both of them, especially the GameCube, and I just remember the like basket that we kept in them in just being a mess of wires.
Right.
Except we had one Wavebird
Yeah.
that was the one everybody wanted because you didn't have to like untangle anything. You just grabbed it and went.
Right. And like I remember the battery life on these things being pretty good too. It's just a good little controller. Is
So-
there anything else different about it?
Not that I am
For whatever reason, it
aware
just
of.
feels better in my hands.
I think it does seem yeah, maybe so we have
I don't have batteries in it if
r-
it feels lighter.
it does feel lighter, but also maybe it's like all the cord that's wrapped around the other one. But remind me how uh the like wireless connection worked. Am I remembering right that it was like you had to dial into channels?
Yeah,
Then
it just
there's,
had a
like-
little receiver, and the receiver has the same dial as that, and it's like 1 through 20 or something like that. So you just had to turn them to the right number.
Which in a world of, like Bluetooth is so funny to think that
Right.
it's like a CB radio that you have to like
You have to
dial,
dial
into
it in, yeah.
to the right frequency so that way they
But
don't overlap.
My phone has connected to so many different like Bluetooth things now that when I just try to like connect it to my headphones, it's like trying to connect to something else, and I'm like, no, stop that. That's our friend's soundbar. We're not there anymore. Why are you trying?
Yeah.
But it's a great controller. Can you think of any other controllers for the GameCube that would even be in this conversation?
I can think of one, and that's the Donkey Konga bongos.
Oh, Mark, be still my heart. Yeah, it's a microphone and 2 buttons is basically what it is, and a start button on the front of it.
Yep.
Obviously that's not going to be our controller for this, but I do love those bongos.
Mm-hmm.
Real question: what is our representative controller of the GameCube? Is it the Wavebird or the vanilla GameCube controller?
So I really think you can't go wrong in either way.
Yeah.
I am inclined to give it to the Wavebird only because it feels, especially again when you're looking at the history of it laid out on this table, where you're
Mhm.
like, oh, okay, yes, the Wii is going to be very different from like a like wireless technology perspective. It feels like the
That's
Wavebird
the
is like
apex,
leading the way.
Yeah. I think that's right. Also, just it's the version that we have sitting on the table is gray, and the regular GameCube controller that we have on the table is orange, which I know is a strange color of GameCube controller, but I love it anyway. But it just doesn't feel like it's part of the same evolutionary line because of that, right? So moving the non-Wavebird aside, Wavebird is going to represent the GameCube.
That is kind of interesting. The default GameCube controller was purple, right?
Yes.
Yeah, to match the system.
Mhm.
And so that's the first like non-gray standard controller.
Yeah. Well, and was the black one also standard, or was that
Maybe with later when they had the black
black GameCube?
The black
yeah,
GameCube.
maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, the history of like the colors of those things, and then they just stopped doing it with the Wii, right? Like they were big into different color controllers with the Nintendo 64 and the GameCube, and then the Wii they were like, forget it, we're all iPhones now.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Should we move on to the Wii?
Yeah, let's do it.
This I'm already worried because I think it's hard to determine. I think there may be like 2 things that it's between, but we have a couple Wii controllers on the table right now. There's the Wii Remote or the Wiimote, and either it by itself or with a nunchuck, and I don't know which one we want to count as like part of that. But let's just talk about the Wii Remote by itself for a little bit.
Yeah. So I feel like the big thing, I mean, the Wii Remote obviously has a very unique shape.
Yes.
But the big thing that we take for granted now, but at the time, super crazy, and even now, when you think about it, it's like that's
still crazy.
Is the motion controls.
Right. The motion controls and the so both the gyro inside that like can detect motion, albeit primitively, right? And the like IR pointer thing that lets it also like kind of function as a mouse, and those 2 things are independent inputs, right? So those features, and then all these other buttons on top of it. And the fact that the A and B buttons, which have been on every other controller to date, are accessible when you hold it like a remote control, and the B button is the trigger. Like, it's such a bold statement of like, no, this is how this thing is used.
It has such a nice A button.
The A button is very good.
A button is very nice, and so it has a.
The B button's good too.
The B button,
frankly.
So it has a power button on each of the controllers. At the top, when you're using it like a remote control, is a D-pad. Then there's the A button, and then below that is a home button to take you to the Wii's home menu, and then a like minus and plus buttons.
Right, which are now replacing the select and start, and that's standard from here on out, right?
And I think so, yeah. And then underneath that is a speaker. So the first time that there's a speaker integrated into a Nintendo controller.
I'm gonna say points off for that speaker.
And then
actually, let me go ahead and say this: speakers and controllers, I don't want them anymore. Hit the curb.
I feel like
I was playing God of War the other day, turned the sound way down, but I could still hear like Kratos going like coming out of my PlayStation. Why do I need that?
Yeah, it was a.
Oh, I'm so immersed because I hear a sound coming out of my lap.
And then underneath that, in like vertical orientation, are 1 and 2 buttons.
1 and 2 buttons, man. Why are these called 1 and 2?
And then
and there's a D-pad.
Yeah, and then underneath that, underneath the 1 and 2 are like 4 lights that tell you which of like the 4 positions on a Wii you are. And you know, of course, another big thing about this is that you could hold it like a standard controller, like horizontally.
Yeah.
And almost like you know, we see with the
Joy-Con.
With the Joy-Con, like the 1 and 2 buttons become like an A and B button on a standard NES controller, and then you have like a D-pad. So so much versatility.
A lot of versatility, and that's before we even talk about like plugging other things into it, because it has a like expansion. What is this thing actually called? An expansion port? I don't know. Whatever it is, this thing at the bottom of the controller that it sort of anticipates you are likely going to be using with the nunchuck primarily, but also with just any other peripheral you plugged in that way.
Which is like pretty much anything, like Rock Band,
yeah.
Guitar Hero, like everything plugged into this port at the bottom.
Right, which is wild because there was no other way to connect. I guess it had the GameCube controller ports, but there was no other way to connect to the Wii. It must have had USB ports, right?
I think it did, but used primarily for like
extended storage.
Right.
Extended? What did I say? Here's something that's neat about the Wii controller is that it is like hand dominance agnostic. So like if you're left-handed or you're right-handed, it doesn't care. It works equally well in either hand.
And I think it's because of the vertical orientation of all of the buttons.
Yeah, but I mean even beyond that, if you want to hold it like an NES controller.
Oh, you're right.
And you just want to like switch how you're holding it.
Yeah, no, you're totally right.
You're not going to be penalized at all, which I guess is actually technically true for all of these. It just
would be crazy.
It would just be crazy.
Like my mind can't handle it.
It's just some serious judgment there. And then, okay, let's talk about the nunchuck a little bit. So nunchuck is just a thumbstick and then a C button and a Z button. And the Z button is big. And the C button is like you have to want to press that button. How do you feel about this as like an attachment to the Wii remote?
Well, sorry, there's just one more thing I want to add is that it has a very imprecise like gyro in here as well.
Oh, right.
So you can like you can shake it.
Right.
And
it could feel that it was being shook, but that's it.
Exactly. It's like two states. Am I being shook or am I not being shook?
Right.
And if I'm not being shook.
And look, I get that.
And if I'm not being shook, then I don't. Yeah, this is relatable. Then I don't jump.
Right.
If I'm being shook, then I like make your cart do a wheelie, or
or like
Mario
block
gets a
with the
extra.
shield or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And so, now that we're talking about it, like we have spent comparatively to something like, basically any of the other controllers, there is so much functionality baked into like the Wiimote and the nunchuck, and so much like versatility in a way that none of the other controllers can even match.
Yeah, true. So okay, and then I also brought the Wii Pro controller, which this thing's a monster. It should be ashamed of itself. It is shaped sort of like a Super NES controller, except instead of remember how we said the dog bone like kind of goes below the controller? This is just straight up round on the edges. And it has L and R buttons that stick out like way too much, and then there's LZ and RZ buttons that are also in here. Again, they're trying to chase the like DualShock functionality of like the separate set of L and R buttons, but like it's just the priority of them is flipped.
And then it has two analog sticks, but it puts them like
they're so
right
close
next to each other.
You
in the
can
middle
make them
of the
kiss.
controller.
They're so close you can make them kiss.
Yeah, to me,
Here, make them kiss.
to me, ooh, to me, the Wii Pro controller feels like what happens when you try to design to please everybody.
Yeah.
Because they're trying to make a controller that it's like, okay, we need something that can be an NES controller, an SNES controller, can work for like Wii games that are going to be like hardcore.
Yeah.
You know, like it's just kind of it's ugly in a way that most Nintendo, like, it has no personality. It
Yeah.
looks like a third-party controller.
Which, to be fair, like lack of personality was part of the Wii's personality when it comes to hardware, right? Like that white glossy sheen.
Oh, you think so? See, I feel like it's the opposite. Like, I feel like
Oh.
we look back on it now, and I mean, even at the time, it's like, oh, this is just aping Apple's like
Yeah.
design language. But I
think this does that too.
But I think of the Wii as being like a cool looking system with like the blue, you know, like glowing light and kind of like
That is true.
the angle on it. Like I think the Wii looked good. It had like a personality and like design intent behind it, whereas this truly looks like garbage.
Let's talk about the A, B, X, Y buttons for a second. Is this the only time that the A, B, X, and Y are lowercase on the on the buttons?
I guess it is to go along with the styling of like Wii. Like everything, the nomenclature during the time, you know, like.
But the W is capitalized.
Is it?
Yeah, check it out.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, I have no idea why they did that.
And then the start, it's okay. We'll check this. There's a plus and minus button on here, but they're also labeled as start and select, and they're all caps.
You know what I also hate is on since we're really getting
let's
into
lay into this controller.
All right, so on the analog sticks,
Yeah.
it has this like octagon cutout shape to it,
Yeah.
which echoes the camera button, the C stick on the GameCube controller. But for some reason, having two of them. Oh, and I guess actually the analog stick on the GameCube controller as well. But for some reason, having them.
Well, and the nunchuck and the Nintendo 64 controller.
Oh, you're right. So they're just echoing it, but for some reason, having the two of them like right next to each other really grinds my gears. I in case you couldn't tell,
we don't
really
care for this controller.
This
right.
controller.
It's not a good controller.
No.
And you need to connect it to a Wii remote in order to use it.
So funny.
Which is it's like if it could connect directly to the Wii, I think it would go up in my estimation considerably.
Yeah, they definitely learned their lesson. Like the next time they did a pro controller, you know, like they it was more fitting of that title.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. We brought it up earlier. Let's talk about the Wii balance board. We don't have a Wii balance board here, but at home you should check under your couch because there probably is one shoved under a couch and forgotten. This thing actually did not require a Wii remote connected to it.
Yeah.
It could do its own.
It's more of a pro controller than the pro controller.
More of a pro controller. That's right. Just a fitness pro. Obviously, like a revolutionary interface for playing video games, but of limited use, right?
Yeah.
Like it's really just in Wii fit. Could you really use it?
And then, of course, there are other like peripherals that would plug into that utility port on the Wiimote. But I'm hard pressed to call them like. I mean, are they controllers like again like the Rock Band instruments or a microphone for Let's Sing or like something like that?
Well, and all of that is also third party stuff too.
Yeah,
like
that's
there
true.
are third party controllers for all these things that we're not considering.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean the Wii Zapper is the only other thing that I could think of.
Oh my gosh, you're right.
But that is really just a hunk of plastic that a Wii remote and nunchuck like snapped into.
Uh-huh.
It didn't have any of its own buttons.
Yeah, I don't think so. Of course, is famously used in Link's crossbow training.
Famously. All right, so what is the representative controller here? I think the only thing we've determined is that it's not the Pro controller.
I think it's my vote is that it would be the Wii remote on its own.
That's my vote as well. Even though I always thought like my favorite way to interact with it was the Wii remote and nunchuck, and maybe because like my favorite experiences on the Wii are Mario Galaxy and Mario Galaxy 2 and Twilight Princess, and both of those or all three of those games required that you had that nunchuck there. But the Wii remote is like the iconic.
Yeah,
That's
I
just
think
what.
so.
Yeah,
Yeah, this is not a controller really unto itself, but just a tip of the hat to the Mario Kart Wii
oh, that wheel.
wheel that
Yeah.
you could like pop the Wiimote into the center
Yep.
and use it to like control your
You
you
could
could
use,
you
like,
could
the
play,
motion controls,
Yeah, you
yeah.
can play the entire game through motion controls.
And it did a nice job of it. There was like a B button on the back of it that was bigger. So if you wanted to use it generally did make it easier to do like the motion control steering. Mario Kart on the Wii, Mark, I don't know if you know this. I only played it motion controls. My friends and I were like motion control kings on that thing, and that's the only way we played it.
Did you have like the golden wheel icon that
No, because we never played it online because the online didn't work. But it's no, I like when we got over to Mario Kart 8. I was like, oh, I had to like make the choice to be like, no, I'm gonna go back to controller. But we had 3 of those wheels in my apartment in Chicago, and so like one person would have to like use a Wii remote just like naked, but the rest of us all had them like popped into wheels.
Yeah,
and just, like,
that's amazing. I love that. That was not my experience with Mario Kart Wii at all. Like I was definitely a Wiimote and nunchuck person. That's how I played that game.
Yeah. That look, there are a million different ways to play it, and they're all valid. But like for whatever reason, I remember my roommate at the time, Taylor, and I going to get Mario Kart Wii. And seeing that it came with this wheel, and we were like, we need to buy more wheels. We got as many as we could, which was 3. I would have liked to have a 4th, but
I think Wii Remote is the great choice. Just to point out that I think this is the first Nintendo console that also had backwards compatibility for another Nintendo controller, like that you could plug in.
Yeah. Mhm.
It had 4 GameCube controller ports on the top of it, so you could plug in GameCube controllers primarily just to support Smash Brothers.
Yes. Well, and because like did they make Wii games that like benefited from that? I mean, I guess
Not
Smash
to my
eventually
memory.
would, but...
Yeah, like Smash. But yeah, not to my memory.
Yeah.
I mean, you could and maybe the reason they had it is, it was also the first Nintendo console that was backwards compatible. You could play GameCube games on it.
Yeah. So you would need to have a way to use GameCube controllers.
Mhm.
I think there's also this is the first time also that Nintendo is like interested in making sure you have enough controllers to control, if you're in a party situation. But the Wii remote ends up being such a like cornerstone of the social experience of the Wii that like I don't know, the multiple controller ports on the top of it kind of go away or
Right.
become irrelevant.
So I think you could like connect like what, up to 8 controllers to a Wii.
I don't think so. I think because it only has the 4.
Yeah, but my memory is that if you were like the 5th controller, it'd be like 2 colors,
Right.
and then like if you were the 6th controller, it'd be like the 1st and 3rd would be light up.
Yeah,
and then-
I don't.
Yeah, I
remember.
don't entirely.
I know you
remember
can
either.
connect 8 Joy-Cons
Mm,
to the Switch.
well, we'll never know for sure.
Well, but we will get to talking about the Joy-Cons in a second.
Also, I
Yes.
just want to preemptively debug myself and say
Yeah.
I know that the Game Boy Advance was backwards compatible with Game Boy games, but I meant home console.
Right, and also the DS was backwards compatible with the GBA, but you said controller anyway, so...
Yeah, but then later...
But
know
then you
what? It
start
doesn't
talking about
matter.
games. Yeah, no, I get you. I get you. You're in the head of the listener, and the listener is in your head. We need to wipe the slate clean and just be in our own heads, and that'll be okay. Okay, so the Wii remote by itself
I think so.
is the representative controller. Mark, now we're on to the Wii U. I think the obvious candidate here is the Wii U gamepad. I guess really only two possible contenders: the Wii U gamepad or the Wii U Pro controller, which you spoke about just a second ago as a much closer approximation of what the competitors are doing at this time.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that thing first, because I think let's just get it out of the way.
Yeah. So the Wii U Pro controller is
It's like an Xbox controller.
Yeah, it is. It is a lot like an Xbox controller. It's like a shiny plastic,
Yeah.
and it has two analog sticks, but
And the analog sticks are on the outside.
yeah, they're on the outside, and they're not like askew. Like sometimes, like you have one
Yeah,
at the top
offset.
and one,
Yeah.
offset, but they're not. They're in line. And then there's of course a D-pad, a home button, a power button, a select and start. Again, labeled, but they're plus and minus.
They're labeled as plus and minus and start and select.
Uh-huh.
All right.
And then you have
ABXY buttons.
and they're all, what did we decide that this was called? Convex. And they're like rubbery. They are not like plasticky. Or is this just the toll of time?
I mean, they're a different texture from the plastic of the controller. I think that they're just like a little bit more like matte in their texture.
And then you have L and R, and then the L or ZL and ZR buttons.
Right. And those are appropriately like the Z buttons are appropriately triggery, not in a like analog kind of way, but just that they're further back, they're bigger buttons, making the distinction between bumper and trigger like the PlayStation controller does and like the Xbox controller does. And also does a pretty good job of emulating just like the buttons of the Wii U gamepad, which I think is the obvious has to be the controller that we use to represent the GameCube.
Yeah.
Or the GameCube, the Wii U. Mark, how dare you let me say that? Mark, hold that Wii U controller for just a little bit. I love this thing. It has and actually the Pro controller has this as well, but it has the near field reader, so it can interact with Amiibo. It is a little bit like holding a Switch Lite, but there are like some extra curves on the back of this thing that make it so much more pleasant to hold than holding on to a Switch in handheld mode. And there's this like nice little like lip at the back of it that also like lets it rest on your fingers. I think this thing has a really nice form factor. And is actually a very comfortable, fun way to play games on the Wii U.
It also has just a ton of functionality. So it has a microphone.
Yep.
It has a like front-facing camera.
Mm-hmm.
It has like a fairly large touchscreen.
Yep.
That can also be used, to just play Wii U games.
Provided you're within like 8 feet of your Wii U. Yeah.
And then, in the Wii U version of Mario Kart 8 has a big honk button in the middle.
All right. You don't need to. You don't need to bring it down while we're complimenting it. This thing has.
I love the honk button.
This thing has a notoriously bad battery life. So like you do need to. Every other controller I have, I kind of leave it disconnected until I'm like, oh, the battery's low. This thing, it returns to its dock every time I'm done with it. Otherwise, the next time I play, there will be no power. It also has a TV button on it, nestled in the bottom right corner, so that you can turn your TV on and use it as a remote control.
It also has a headphone jack.
Right. Yeah, so you could just listen to your games. Like if you're playing this thing on the couch next to someone who's watching TV, and instead of playing the game on the TV, you're putting it all on the gamepad. You can have the audio also just come out of the headphones. It has speakers too, obviously, and this is a good speaker, not like the Wii remote speaker. Yeah, I think this is a great controller.
Yeah, I'm about to say something negative, which is fine because this is not.
It's fine. Of course,
so
you
can put away the big red button.
I didn't even bring the big red button.
But It is such a I agree with you. I think it is like a really remarkable controller. It is such a bummer that they just could not figure out why it existed.
Yeah. Yes. It is also, here's the thing, Mark, if they made a Wii U gamepad like controller as like an accessory for the Switch, I would love it.
Oh my gosh, could you imagine playing I've never thought about it until you said that, and that is an amazing idea because can you imagine playing like co-op games that require two switches, but instead of buying a whole new switch, you buy like you spend still $150 or whatever.
Yeah.
It would be to get this
get
like
this little
maybe
gamepad.
at that point you just pay the extra 50 and you
just get a Switch Lite.
a Switch Lite. But still, I like where you're going. Yeah.
Well, and just that if they could be the same machine, right?
Uh-huh.
That so like you could have that dual screen experience again. And then that's the other thing is that this is the last gasp of dual screen gaming, right? So yeah, I don't know. I just think it's a cool controller. And you know, if I'm playing a game on the Wii U, I know I'm gonna have like a comfortable hand time.
The Wii U is just such a fascinating failure.
It's a fascinating failure.
Because it has so many things going for it, and yet at the same time, you entirely understand why it was just a huge disaster.
Yeah. Well, and, you know, Nintendo needed to pivot from what the Wii was to something else. And the Wii U was doing that, but like that, the pivot was always going to hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, maybe I'm maybe just making excuses for them now. But I also think it's a good piece of hardware.
Well, have you ever heard like the theory that do you remember in the 80s? I think it was in the 80s when Coca-Cola introduced a whole new formula
Coke,
called New Coke, which was like first of all crazy that they thought it was a good idea,
right?
Because they retired original classic Coca-Cola, classic Coca-Cola. Classic
Coca-Cola.
And then they introduced New Coke. Everybody hated New Coke, so they brought back Coca-Cola Classic. But I believe that at that time they made the switch from sugar to corn syrup, and so you know, like the conspiracy theory is like, well, they did it on purpose, because then you know they could bring it back. Everybody loves it, and
they don't miss.
They were able to substitute the sweetener without people really like noticing. And then so similarly, do you think like the Wii U was that New Coke that they knew the sweet switch was going to satiate people's appetites?
Maybe. I mean, I think that is possible. Man, that is devious. I didn't realize that was when they switched from sugar to corn syrup.
I think.
Okay, all right. That's a great conspiracy theory though, and one that I am ready to believe until someone proves me wrong. All right. So that's the Wii U gamepad done and in the books. The Nintendo Switch.
Mm-hmm.
Two possible candidates here. One is the Joy-Cons, which I think have to be considered as a pair. Right?
Yeah, totally.
Or the Pro Controller. And the Pro Controller is a good controller. It's a fine controller. I'm going to say pretty unremarkable.
Yeah. Oh, totally. The Pro Controller, especially even more than the Wii U one, in my opinion, is Nintendo just being like, this is the controller that is just like all the other controllers.
Yeah. Yeah, truly. And like it does. Oh, one more thing about the Wii U gamepad. There's a gyro in that bad boy, so it can sense motion as well. That's also true of the Switch Pro controllers, that it has like a gyro in it, you know, as well.
And lest we forget HD Rumble, so
yes.
we can see, so we know how many ice cubes are in that glass.
Okay, but let's talk about the Joy-Con, because I think it's going to be the Joy-Con, right? Because they're the remarkable, unique thing about the Switch. It's what allows the Switch to switch. And, you know, is they're sort of the Wii Remote with Wii Motion Plus, which we didn't talk about, and like two separate like Super NES controllers kind of all rolled into one. You were talking about the versatility of the Wiimote, and I think the Joy-Cons got them beat.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. The right Joy-Con has like a little IR sensor that we, you know, later we found out with Labo could
Yep.
also act as like a camera almost.
Yeah, acts as a little camera, so like it can actually take like a video feed from that. But it's also good for reading like different colors and positioning of tapes, like reflective tapes, which is how a lot of the Labo functionality like actually worked. Speaking of just like extra functionality, it has an RF reader, no, near field reader for Amiibo. Um, the two thumbsticks, which are offset if you're holding them like a pair, are also like buttons that you can push in. Um,
And not just offset for like aesthetic reasons, like offset because if you remove them from the Switch or from the holder and use them like give one to each person to use
Yeah.
as like a full controller on its own and like hold it vertically, I think that's why they're offset,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, totally. So that they both have the thumbstick on the left side, and then the quartet of buttons, the like ordinal buttons on the right side. And then if you remove it from the grip, we have ours in a grip right now. That they have like little L and R buttons on like the top of them, which are tricky to access as they're like sort of in that rail. But there are those what are they called?
I was just trying to
they're called
remember.
grips. Are
Yeah,
they
like the holders or like something like that.
Joy-Con toppers?
That you like slide it into.
Yeah.
And they are like rounded as well, so it kind of makes the Joy-Con like perfectly round.
Yeah.
And then like they're kind of ingenious. So when you remove them and they're separate, they have an equal number of buttons. One of them has a home button, the other one has the capture button. One has the plus, the other one has a minus. It's missing a D-pad, which is a little bit of a bummer. You just have those like 4 directional buttons.
But I mean, it could be worse. It could have the Pro Controller's D-pad, which is bad. It's a bad D-pad.
Which is so disappointing because generally speaking, Nintendo has good, often great D-pads.
I mean, now that we can play with the Nintendo 64 controller, we'll never have to go back to having a bad D-pad again.
But yeah, the Joy-Con are just like so remarkable. I have such fond memories of the like January 2017 Switch full reveal when they were Koizumi was out
lounging
there
on
and
the
they,
couch.
like, they
yeah,
like pulled out a couch for it
Yep.
so he could show like how you could lazily do it with one hand like a Wiimote, or it can be like a fully functioning controller. I do not own a Pro Controller. I have played Zelda.
that's
like,
wild to
at
me,
like
by the way.
Doom. I have played everything using a Joy-Con grip, and I've become like so used to it and so like comfortable doing it that way. I really like the Joy-Con. I think that they're very remarkable.
All right. So the Joy-Con, a pair of Joy-Con, has to be the representative controller here.
Yeah.
Right?
Any other thing we want to call out? I mean, there is the Ring-Con for like Ring Fit Adventure,
Right.
which
yeah.
is it's cool.
It's cool, but
as
it
far
only
as peripherals go.
but it only works because of the Joy-Cons, right?
I can't really think of any other like any like
we already kind of shouted out Labo.
But again, all powered by
Joy-Con.
Joy-Con.
Which again, like none of the rest of these things can even come close to doing, right? It is a fascinating little piece of hardware. Okay, so Joy-Con, that's going to be it. Do we want to bring into this conversation the Virtual Boy controller?
I wish we had one in front of us.
We don't have one in front of us.
So we could like touch it because
it's crazy. So it has 2 grips. Remember the tridents on the Nintendo 64 controller. It just has 2 like kind of prongs.
These are like thin and long.
They're very long, yeah. And on each side, on the outside of each side, there's a D-pad. 2 D-pads on this thing. And then on the left side, there's a start and select button that are big gray buttons, like big round gray buttons. And then like the mirror image on the right side are A and B buttons that are big red buttons. So it is really like a perfectly symmetrical controller, just like with the colors that aren't exactly the same. The battery, get this, the battery for the whole system was in the controller.
Oh, so that's why it has this big
Has
like
this giant pack on the back of it. Because that's where you put the like 8 AA batteries or whatever it took to run that thing. Might have been 6, maybe it's only 4. Whatever batteries they are in that controller, powering the whole Virtual Boy.
Now, never owned a Virtual Boy. Played with it like a little bit at friend's house. Remind me, were there a lot of games that took advantage of the 2 D-pads? Like,
Oh, I'd say there are no games that took advantage of the 2 D-pads. I don't think they knew what they were making that hardware for. Like, you know, it came out a year before the Nintendo 64, right? So like,
right.
And they're doing like a simulated 3D space. And that's like before they were even working in 3D graphics. So like they don't know what they needed at this point, right?
Yeah, it's just so interesting. I think you're right, because like the Nintendo 64 controller, very weird but purpose built.
Yes.
You know, whereas like the Virtual Boy controller feels like not really built with anything in mind. It's just like, maybe we'll need 2 D-pads.
Maybe we'll need 2 D-pads. The only thing that I can like sort of reason is that it's good that it has the 2 big grips so that like your hand is always like anchored in something, right?
This really does look like an M. Like, it's difficult to describe how like long they're
huge.
The trident is.
I mean, like it's just like the Nintendo 64, really. But the fact that the button layout is so simple and that it's perfectly mirrored, I think is them trying to be like, you don't have to look at the controller. Like, because your face is always buried in the headset, and so you can't look down at the controller to see what you're doing. There's only the 2 buttons, really.
Yeah, it almost looks like which they obviously didn't, because the system in no way would support this because you're looking through these like goggles. But it almost looks like the Joy-Con, where it's intended for one person to be using each side, you know, because it is so perfectly mirrored.
Yeah.
But again, like, you could not practically
couldn't do that.
Yeah.
Right. And there was a like link cable slot for the Virtual Boy so that you could play like competitively against another person, but no games supported it, and they never released the cable.
Oh wow.
Isn't that crazy? Like they thought it was going to happen, and they were like, no, you know what? It's not. People are going to play Nestor's Funky Bowling all by themselves. Do we even want to include this? I feel like it just goes immediately to last place.
Yeah. Interesting curiosity.
An interesting curiosity indeed. Mark, we've been talking about these controllers for an hour and 6 minutes now. We should rank them.
Let's do it.
This is going to be impossible. I'm feeling very... Here, I'm going to remove the ones that are not in contention. So goodbye, Nunchuck. Goodbye, Wii U Pro Controller. Goodbye, Wii Pro Controller. Leaving us just with the NES, Super NES, Nintendo 64, Wavebird, Wii Remote, Wii U Gamepad, and Joy-Cons.
So, I have a gut instinct for last.
Okay.
And I respect this controller a lot, but I think it's the NES controller.
I will agree with you, but I think it is... Yeah, I respect this controller a lot, and there are no bad controllers here.
Yeah, I think I agree with that.
No bad controllers here, but the NES, look, it's got these pointy little edges and not that many buttons. Otherwise, it is perfect, though. I mean, just look at the design on this thing.
It is iconic.
Yeah.
You know, like, so no shade.
No shade whatsoever.
To the NES controller, but I think it's the least good of the ones that are on here.
Can I share a concern that I have? I think it is possible that the Super NES controller is next. But I love this controller. Like, it is... I've often said that, you know, I saw I heard a story on NPR about an opera singer who was like had dementia and Alzheimer's and couldn't communicate or anything like that. But you put an old like recording of an opera that she performed in her youth on, and she could sing every note and basically would come alive. When I am in that state at like 98 years old, if you put a Super NES controller in my hand, I'm going to know how to beat Super Mario World. So this will be the Link to my brain someday, but I think it is the next worst controller on here.
Do you know what? I share all of those sentiments. I think we just have to, it is our mantra for the rest of this episode. There are no bad controllers.
There are no bad controllers on here.
I just think that you're right, that this is probably the one that is next on the list.
Although I could see an argument for the Nintendo 64 controller going somewhere else in the bottom here. You want to fight that?
No, I don't. I'm sighing because it's hard for me to argue against that. The man, I keep doing that, but the Nintendo 64 controller is so specific in my mind.
Yeah.
But it is
And that thumbstick falls apart.
the thumbstick falls apart. It is like, now you're playing games with it. What I will say is that no controller controls a Nintendo 64 game better than a Nintendo 64 controller.
Yeah, no, you're right. You are correct.
Like we talked about in the Wii era, I tried playing Nintendo 64 games on the Wii Pro controller.
But look at this monster. Of course you couldn't do it.
No, it just doesn't make sense. Like,
got a lowercase b button.
Like it is like the perfect controller for its time. You know what I mean? And in that way, it's very impressive.
Can we put it below the Super NES controller, but above the NES?
Let's do that. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's do that.
All right. I'm just lining them up here, which means so the bottom is the NES, then the Nintendo 64, then the Super NES, which leaves us with the Wii Remote, the Wavebird, the Wii U gamepad, and the Joy-Con. Again, I just got to reiterate, no bad controllers here.
No bad controllers. And so with that in mind, I think, and again, maybe this is just because I didn't own one, that I would put the Wii U gamepad next.
Oh boy, that Wii U gamepad. You can play games right on it.
And it has a gyro in it, so it could sense whether you had picked it up in a long time or not, so it could be sad.
Is that a strike in its favor or against it? So for me, I think it is. Oh God, this is so hard because I think for me that the next one is either I may put the Wavebird next.
You're hesitating, but I kind of agree with that. I know I just put up the Wii U gamepad, but the reason I would put the Wavebird is that we now love the GameCube controller.
Yeah.
And the GameCube was my primary machine during that era. Like I didn't own an Xbox, I didn't own a PlayStation 2. And but in a way that I feel like is not necessarily true for the N64 controller, the GameCube is like an interesting, fun curiosity that we love because we all love the GameCube now for nostalgia reasons. But
sure,
I don't know that it's that good of a
You're
controller.
describing the Wii U as well. But yeah, and like the Wavebird, obviously we were singing its praises before, and I feel like it often gets heralded as like the best controller ever. And I just don't. The C stick nub is so strange. Like it's so close to being a regular controller, but it's just not.
Okay,
and maybe that's my real strike against it.
I see what you're saying.
Is that like it thinks it's being a DualShock, but like it's just weird enough that like it doesn't have the nice like 4-button controller layout.
Can I offer but we talked about how much we love the big,
and I do love the big green button.
The big green button and like the little pills. Can I offer one maybe unfair criticism of the Wii U?
Sure.
In that I don't want to blame the complete failure of the Wii U on the Wii U gamepad, and yet it really kind of personifies or controllerifies all the issues with the Wii U, where you're like, here's the primary interface in which you're designed to use the system, and nobody can figure out what it is good for.
Yeah. And in that way, it is very much like the portable systems at that time. Although they seem to figure it out, and especially the vanilla DS figured out what the DS was for.
So I think my vote would be the Wii U gamepad next, and then the Wavebird above it.
Wavebird above that. All right, that hurts me a little bit, but I think I can't like when I think about this like by myself. There's a version of that scenario where the Wii U gamepad takes it, like wins everything, first place, number 1. But I'll concede to put it at number 4 on our list. And then number 3 is the Wavebird, which means the number 1 spot. Does it go to the Wii Remote or the Joy-Con? if I'm playing a game now, I want to play it with Joy-Con versus playing it with the Wii Remote.
I think that's true. Oh, this is so crazy that these
That these are our top two.
yeah.
Does this feel wrong now?
Well, here I think my heart is telling me that the Wii Remote is number 1. And the reason I give it to number 1 is the versatility
Mhm.
of the Wii Remote, the
Not as versatile as the Joy-Con. Go on.
the do you not think so? Do you I think it is yeah, you might be right. Maybe it's not as versatile as the Joy-Con.
It is more. It's not as versatile, but it is a million times more approachable.
Yeah, this is
Genuinely, you can just hand someone a Wii Remote and play a Wii game with them.
which is wild.
Yeah.
That it's like that seemingly just like like you said, approachable or like
Yeah.
understandable.
Yes. Yeah. It's intuitive. It's an intuitive
Yeah.
controller, which you can't say for the rest of these monstrosities, right? So, I mean, I'm tempted to agree with you and also put the Wii Remote at number 1. That was my gut as we were talking about it. It's all.
I'm just like, think of the experiences you had with like a Wiimote. You know, like the for whatever reason the Joy-Con just doesn't compare for me, and that's maybe because I mean obviously the Joy-Con would be our number 2 in this scenario. So it is
No bad controllers.
Yeah, no bad controllers. It's truly remarkable, but because it is just kind of like, what if we took a Wii Remote and then like made it, well, now that I'm saying it, it's like, actually that's an incredible thing that they were able to do, but like take a Wii Remote,
It's an amazing
but also
feat,
have it
yes.
act as just like a standard controller and have that work.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, so maybe
I'm-
I have talked myself into the Joy-Con.
And it's an engineering marvel. It's
Yeah.
what allows the Switch to be the special thing that it is. I hate the position that we've put ourselves in here. Why are we ranking these? Why didn't we just talk about the
Yeah,
controllers?
no bad controllers.
No bad controllers here.
But yeah, so I think I've come around to it. I think I want to say Wii number 2, Wiimote number 2, and Joy-Con
number 1. Okay, we're going to count from the bottom. I'll back up to the top, and we're going to really scrutinize our decisions here at each step of the way. So at the bottom of the list, coming in at number 7, is that right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yes. Coming in at number 7. Well, coming in at number 8, the Virtual Boy. Coming in at number 7, the NES controller. Number 6, the Nintendo 64 controller. Number 5, the Super NES controller. I feel good about all that so far.
Okay, yeah.
Number 4, the Wii U gamepad. Number 3, the Wavebird. Number 2, the Wii Remote. And number 1, a pair of Joy-Con.
Okay. Let's say we're living in a world where this is not true.
What is?
our list.
Okay.
Let's live. We're a world where our definitive list is not this. What do you do with the Wii U gamepad?
What do you mean? What do you do with it?
Well, you were saying, there like exists a world where it's number 1.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, like what do you do with it? Because it is both amazing, like the Joy-Con,
Right.
and also just like primitive.
I mean, Mark. Here's what's in my heart.
Okay.
And this sucks. It's a 4-way tie for
No,
first place.
no.
This is
I
what's in my heart.
refuse.
It's a 4-way tie for first place with the Joy-Con, the Wii Remote, the Wavebird, and the Wii U gamepad. And you are right to refuse it. But that's what's in my heart right now.
It feels like such a okay, all right.
Please stand your ground. Because you're right that is the weak choice, and my heart is weak.
Well, I truly okay, here's how I think we move forward.
Yeah.
is I'm going to throw out different scenarios and you just react to them.
Okay. I'm clearing my mind.
Yeah.
It's a blank canvas. Go.
Super Nintendo controller at number 1.
Okay.
Let's see. Wavebird.
What kind of scenarios are these? These are just
They're just different options.
Okay.
Because I feel like we're not feeling like super confident.
Well, yeah, I am not feeling
like
confident.
the top like more than half of the list.
Yeah. Which is why I said 4-way tie for first place.
Yeah. Okay, I do think you're. Wait. I'm gonna keep doing this. So,
Okay.
Wavebird below the Wii U gamepad. I might actually feel better about that.
The Wavebird below the. That's how I wanted it when
You're
we were
right.
talking about it.
Uh-huh.
But I also recognize the strengths of the Wavebird.
Right.
I'll sign off on that. I would like that Switch. I would prefer that Switch.
Let's do that. Let's do that. But for me, the gamepad can't go any higher, and that's partly just because like I didn't own one, and so I don't think that fondly of it.
Sure, but also there is a prohibitive, an uncrossable wall, really, at the Wii Remote / the Joy-Con.
I also think that there's a question as to like, what do we mean by best?
Yeah,
because
great. Hey, what a great question and a great time to pose it.
Because the N64 controller, in the way that we've been talking about it, where it's like, purpose built for the Nintendo 64.
Yes,
and in a way that which is true of the Wii U gamepad, but the Wii U gamepad like, they ran into the limitations of that asynchronous gameplay so quickly that it was really like, well, you have a Wii U gamepad, but the majority of like anybody who's playing with you, the primary interface is going to be a Wii remote.
And I hear that, and I hear that as a valid criticism of the thing. I think that ignores just how comfortable it is to use it as a regular old controller. Like when I'm playing Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze on that thing, and the gamepad itself goes black because it doesn't display anything and there's no input on the touchscreen, that is still my preferred way to play that game. That's better than using Joy-Cons on the Switch. That's better than using the Wii U Pro Controller. It's better than using the Switch Pro Controller. That is how it's just a comfortable thing to hold. Its D-pad is solid, and the top Joy-Cons or not Joy-Cons, the thumbsticks are like very pleasing. Like that's where I want them to be.
I totally hear you. I like this list. The thing I'm struggling with the Joy-Cons is that it's probably like recency versus in 20 years when we're looking at these controllers, we'll be like, oh, like Joy-Con are awesome, but the Joy-Con do not fill me with warm feelings like some of these other controllers do.
Yeah. Here's another thing. We did talk about how the thumbstick on the Nintendo 64 controller would fail. Joy-Cons drift.
Oh, yeah, like crazy.
We don't have drift on any of the rest of these controllers.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a strike against it.
Also, it does have a lot of functionality, like pointer functionality and all that kind of stuff, but in some ways it's inferior to the Wiimote because it's doing it using just like gyro, and so
that's true.
So you're playing like Skyward Sword and you're constantly like resetting it.
That's true. But it doesn't require a little light sensor bar to do what it does.
Or like 2 candles or however you want to make shit do it.
Can you really do that? Can we try to do that some days? Like set up 2 candles in front of my TV and summon the ghost of a we had to do like some kind of seance to make it work.
We should totally do that.
But the pointer controls are solid. Very good. The best way to play Super Mario Galaxy and like collect star bits.
On a Wii remote, you mean?
Yeah, sorry.
It just feels so weird to have like the newer controllers all at the top.
Yeah, but I mean the Wii remote at this point is not like and maybe that's not that weird, right? That like, because if we were to rank the PlayStation controllers, it would be a reverse chronological line.
Oh yeah, that's
right?
true.
I mean, like
that's true.
They should be getting better.
Okay, so yeah, I feel like by moving the Wavebird down, I feel good about this.
I feel like that's the most controversial thing we've done. Is move the Wavebird down. But I agree. This is a list that I'm more comfortable with. Mark, we're starting back at the bottom. I'm not even going to say Virtual Boy this time. Coming in at number 7 is the NES controller. Coming in at number 6 is the Nintendo 64. Number 5 is the Super NES controller. Number 4 is the GameCube Wave Bird. Number 3 is the Wii U gamepad. Number 2 is the Wii Remote or the Wiimote. And then number 1 is the Nintendo Switch Joy-Con.
I love it. Put it in the book. Definitive.
All right, Mark, let's close this out. All right. Normally at this point in the show, I would solicit feedback and to say how our list differs from your personal list. I don't know that I want to. I don't know that I want to invite that criticism, Mark. To you?
Oh yeah, I'm super into it because I feel like I think we worked our way to a comfortable ranking.
Sure. Okay. So if you want to let us have it, you can email us at nintendocartridgesociety@gmail.com or hit us up on Twitter. You can follow us on Twitter. I'm at Patrick_Ellers. Mark is at MKE Mitchell, and the show is at NinCart Society. You can join our Discord as well, where I'm sure we will be discussing this further. Just email us or send us an email, and we will be happy to invite you. Did I say email twice?
Uh-huh.
Okay, great. You know what? Any way that you can communicate with us, do that. We'll send you an invite, and then we can continue the conversation there. Anthony DeLuca made our logo. Our theme music is provided by 8-Bit Betty. You can get more of his music by going to 8bitbetty.com or by listening right now. For my co-host, Mark Mitchell, this is Patrick Ellers saying thank you for listening.